Thank you very much. I think we've got the graveyard shift. I think food is obviously more important than our chat, so better make it good for those that are here. Good afternoon, everybody. We're on a tight ship. It's 30 minutes, so we're going to kick straight off. Toby Green mentioned it this morning that the industry has seen an unprecedented amount of consolidation recently. If you look at Wanda's shopping list, it reads pretty impressive. Ironman, Lagardère Events, competitor group, and the first one was Infront Sports. We've also seen our very own Limelight Sports get involved in the game with the acquisition of the IMG UK portfolio, and French organisers of the Tour de France, ASO, have also joined the UK market with the acquisition of Human Race. So, bearing in mind there's been unprecedented consolidation, do you see the trend towards greater industry consolidation continuing? And what do you see as the likely impacts of that, both positive and negative, on the industry and the offering to the consumers?
That's for me?
Yep.
So M&A always gets people excited, right? It's always an interesting topic to start with. I think it's actually important to look at it more as a reflection of the industry and the fact that it's matured so much. I mean, speaking without going too academic, basic economic theory is that there should be enough competition until profits go to zero. That's a perfect economic market, and it's really a reflection of how the mass participation industry, especially in the maturer markets, has developed incredibly quickly that this is now occurring, right? So we saw a consolidation wave 2 or 3 years ago, steadied a little bit, and now arguably coming again with Wanda, which gets a lot of press, and the others you mentioned, but also maybe less known in this room, but actually almost as large, as a group called Golazo that's out of Europe that I think is now approaching 1.3 million athletes. And they have been going around the European market and partnering with organizers and bringing them together. And it's partly a reflection also of the unique age of the industry. So Motiv ourselves, we are a consolidator, so that's my plug. I said I'd plug us within about 2 minutes of starting. We've done 16 partnerships, I like to call them partnerships, not acquisitions, over the last 2 years. And the reason I mention that is that the composition of the events we're buying are really, really unique, or partnering with. Again, I don't want to use the word buying. And it's the fact that we're reaching a time point in the industry where many of these events were founded 35 to 40 years ago. So, and we'll talk about this in a minute in the States. Many events have had their 40th, 41st, and 42nd birthday over the last 2 or 3 years. In fact, one of ours is 41 this year. And the interesting dynamic there is that it's not necessarily a reflection of the industry as much as the people that started the industry. And they're looking at how do their legacies continue. And as glamorous as our industry is, it's not often a natural thing that you pass on to a son or a daughter. And so you've got this dynamic where event directors that have built these fantastic business over time are wanting to find out where, or wanting to find a path for their events to continue long into the future. So there's a couple of different factors, I think, that play into the consolidation, James.
And Christine, 2 of the biggest consolidations have been in the US. How have you seen that impact the market, and what is the interest of event organisers to either stick or twist?
That's a great question, and obviously Sam is, Motiv is one of our member organizations. We are a membership organization, so for us as an organization, you know, the more members we have that we can educate and grow the sport, the better. For us, whenever these partnerships, as Sam's describing them, occur, that changes our membership dynamic. And we have to now reinvent ourselves in an education platform of how do we now work with groups that are not so many individual events, but bigger conglomerate events that, you know, how do we serve his needs now because his events are all different, and then just continue to grow the sport in general.
And Marko, from a European perspective, anything to add?
From a European athletics perspective, we are very happy to see the market getting more mature. Okay, in some countries it's saturated. We see different market situations going west to east, north to south. But definitely getting some of the big players, such as Golazo or Infront or Great Run, getting consolidated, acquiring partnerships with the other events cross-border. I think it's strengthening the companies and their potential also to work abroad, to work also outside of European continent. We believe that European market has the knowledge to share as well, and the culture that is sometimes unique, but sometimes it's transversal across the continents. So we are very happy to see the situation on the market as is now. And I think that the marriages are kind of coming into place after everybody have their events for 20, 25 years, 30 years. Now it's time to think about the next episode in that cycle. And we think that this tipping point have reached also our industry.
So if I can touch on one thing, thinking about the name of this conference, I think it's important not to think too myopically about running, right? So the mass participation Asia is the name of the conference, then I think the majority of the room here is involved in running because that's the largest part of mass participation at the moment. But if I had to predict what the next wave of consolidation will be, it's not necessarily just within one sporting niche. And in fact, Wonder Sport is a good example of that, how arguably a triathlon business is now the largest running organizer in North America. In our case, we're actually looking at things in a slightly different way. We're going beyond sports. So our largest event is actually an Oktoberfest beer festival. And the dynamic there is there's a lot of synergy ultimately with a group that can put on a major city marathon, shut down 26 miles of roads, deal with government departments and all the rest, to have a really, really unique skill set. So one of the things that makes me personally most excited about this industry is taking the skill set that's in mass participation sports and then adding other brands, other kinds of events, other kinds of experiences, because there's one trend which I'm sure everyone in this room would agree with, is that the experience economy is really booming. People are spending, and this started with millennials, but it's quickly spread upwards. People want to spend less of their discretionary dollars on handbags, cars, items like that. Now it's all about the Instagrammable moment. And so my prediction for consolidation is that we'll actually see more forms of mass participation organized by single entities.
Great, thank you. Good segue into customer experience in the sense that many successful events of the past decade have put customer experience at the front and center of their plans. Tough Mudder, I would say, was one of the first to redefine the way events were marketed to the consumer. New events like the Colour Run and Music Run, which is very popular in this part of the world, have put their popularity down to the customer experience. Those practices were often adopted by sort of retail and FMCG. What, in the panel's view, has driven this emphasis on experience, and what do you regard as best in class at this point in time?
Great, I love this question. We had the opportunity last year to do a runner retention survey because, as Sam mentioned, we saw sort of a little bit of a downtick over the past couple of years in our sport, and we wanted to understand where those consumers were going. There was a lot of speculation that they were going to the non-traditional events or the obstacle course runs, the color runs, the untimed runs, but that was really speculation. We couldn't prove it, so we wanted to really dive into that. So we surveyed over 5,000 runners, and what we found was people weren't running less. They were just diversifying in what the experience was that they were looking for. We definitely saw folks going towards SoulCycle and Peloton and the park runs, but they were still continuing to run. The problem, and I shouldn't say it's a problem, the market only can bear so many road races on any given weekend. So now it's up to the event directors to really push themselves to put a better experience out there versus just either a 13.1 mile course. An example that I like to use that I think has done a remarkable job of this is the Lululemon brand and their Seawees event in Vancouver. It's a yoga festival, it's a music festival, it's a fashion event, and oh, by the way, there's a half marathon that runs along the beautiful coast of Canada. And I think that a lot of our event organizers in the US are looking for what those opportunities are for that experience, whether it's a VIP package that you can purchase on the front end or that additional festival atmosphere at the finish. And I think that's something that, if you're basically a traditional race, some of the ones that Sam's talking about, that are having their 40th anniversary, that's a little bit difficult sometimes to push yourself to think outside the box. But that's really what's driving the new market and the decision that people are making to whether to do an event or not.
So if without wanting to monopolize the conversation, of just touching on that, We partner with an event in Southern California called the Surf City Marathon. It's been going for 34 years. It's not as big as some of the events over here. It's about 18,000 people, and it takes place in Huntington Beach, right on the Pacific Coast Highway. And with a very subtle addition we added this year is that we finish now, and I touched on Oktoberfest earlier, but with a beach beer festival that takes place at the finish line. And it's the subtlest of changes. It doesn't really take much effort on our part from an operational perspective, but it's bringing in a different kind of consumer now, because people aren't just coming and finishing, going across the finish line and disappearing back to their families. They're staying, they're taking their shoes off, they're sitting on the beach, they're having a beer, they're maybe buying another food item, which obviously works with our budgets, but it really plays into the adding. I think the fact that an event is 30 or 40 years old is not an excuse to not think about that customer experience.
And from the European athletics point of view, Marko, what have you seen and delivered from that perspective?
I think definitely sports is as a content on the TV. It's basically entertainment industry, and we are part of that. So as event-based or non-event-based, we are, or outside of event-based sports and our mass participation in endurance sports have been in a part entertainment for people in some of the type of the events that you mentioned. Then they have been adrenaline driven for obstacle course racing, shorter vertical races, etc. And then of course has been a life-changing experience in mostly the longer endurance events. So I think that that from these three perspectives, the sport is rich, and that this fragmentation also depends on what drives people. So, and certain age categories are connected more to a certain types of things, like the entertainment and adrenaline. Then the other types of population in different age groups are more focused on the endurance, because this proves that they still sustain, etc. So I think that this fragmentation on different types of events is actually just a reflection of what moves people.
So we had a panel yesterday on esports, and we're not going to spend too much time on talking about the variances around esports, but just to give you some stats from the BBC, BBC reported that esports was set to be a 1 billion revenue business and 600 million audience by 2020. If you look at the brands, Mercedes-Benz, Vodafone, Gillette, Budweiser, McDonald's, Coca-Cola, Red Bull, Visa, MasterCard, Adidas, Toyota and DHL are all fighting for this space. What impact do you think esports is and will have on our mass participation industry? And what do you think we as a group can learn from the way they have attracted incredible global non-endemic brands into their space?
I think that esports as well, the virtual running in our case, are bringing us to different demographics, which is the most important probably, because we have the aging group that endurance events are facing, and this issue could be assisted with virtual reality as well, esports, but also we need to look very practical how these channels, these opportunities, this technology can allow us to advance the current product, and then how to create the new product that our knowledge base can deliver. And we had during the European Athletics Convention very good workshop on running, where Bob Verbeek, the CEO and the owner of Golazo, was mentioning in terms of the traditional events, let's say Athens marathons, because Athens marathon is very specific. It's very historic, especially for the Greeks, because of the Battle of Marathonas and for Philippides, who ran back to Athens to bring the good news. Athens is never going to be visited by all the marathon runners. Probably not all the marathon runners will be able to connect with that battle and that distance and this authentic race as it's marketed. But through the virtual running and potentially on a regional course, not on the road that exists now, but maybe on the original course where Philippides was actually running historically, we could bring much bigger masses to the Athens Marathon, to their medal, to their T-shirt, not only through the virtual challenge, through Strava or something else, but then also through the virtual race on a regional, authentic course. And then in terms of gamification is how I would take the example, again, the same example. So we had the Battle of Marathonas. There is Philippides running the distance back to Athens. It's for gaming people, one of the greatest things is the battles and the history. And this is kind of a narrative that could be very easily gamified and brought to the esports with the dual content, with the content of the battle and then the content of the running back and bringing the news. And maybe this could be a narrative for stage one of the what would be the continuous run or different marathons being gamified.
So about 15 years ago, I think it was, the very famous venture capitalist Mark Andreessen came out with a statement that I'm sure many people know here, which is software is eating the world. And at the time it seemed very futurist, but if you think about businesses like Uber, like Airbnb, these are all software businesses that are disrupting established industries. And I think we would all be very remiss not to think about what the software implications are for mass participation sports. I don't know the answer by any sense of the word. I'm incredibly intrigued about what esports is going to do and what opportunity it can bring a new audience into our market. The way we look at our business, to speak to that for a second, is we use the medium of mass participation to reach an audience. But reaching an audience means ultimately you're a data business. And I think for most companies in our space, you need to begin to think that way, whether that's through esports or whether it's some form of other virtualization. I had a really interesting conversation from someone who's going to get up on the stage in just a minute about we need to have virtual strategies. I think the best example in the market we heard yesterday from the TCS New York Marathon, the fact that the New York Marathon takes place in New York doesn't mean that's the only way you should experience it. And that's how I think esports should come in.
My thoughts on that are that we want to make sure we maintain the emotion of the experience as well, and I think that's the one piece that still has to be maintained. We get calls at our office, Rich and I all the time about, do you know anyone who's doing the virtual runs? How are they doing it? And to Sam's point, I don't have the answer on that yet either because it's so new. But I do know that emotional part of it still has to be captured in some way, shape, or form. I think, with the New York City Marathon, they have some great resources with that. What I hope that people, or when they do it, really kind of reach out and talk to folks. Are you doing any virtual run, Sam, in any of your events right now?
Barely. I mean, I would say we're playing at it.
Exactly. Most people are. So I think there's a lot more there, and especially if you can continue to capture that emotion and that feeling of accomplishment that you're not going to get when you cross the finish line and there's 5,000 people cheering you in.
Thank you for that. So we heard yesterday from the guys at TCS about one of the core pillars of their sponsorship of their running program was all about corporate wellness, corporate well-being, and getting a fit and healthy workforce. So there's been a big rise in corporate wellness and investment from companies in wellness programs because more and more companies are recognizing the benefit of a healthy workforce. A stat from a few years ago, GE claimed that if they could improve the fitness of their workforce by 1%, they would drop $2 billion in dollars from their health insurance policy, which is unbelievable. So 1%, $2 billion, just think about what that could be if more and more companies got involved. So just want to start with you, Christine. What do you think has been behind this shift? Do you see it continuing, and how do you think our industry should capitalize but also help develop that program?
No, that's great. There's a huge shift towards working with local companies and corporations, and I think spawned from the event side of they're looking for additional ways to generate revenue as well, and that's a natural way to do that, but it also puts them into the community, and that's really key for a lot of these events, is being seen as a community pillar and how they're giving back to that community. Some of the programs that I've seen work very, very well are when there's a buy-in from local corporations at a very low level, but it continues to get them that, a discounted block of event registrations, because at the end of the day that those folks are then potentially going to turn around and register their kids for the kids run. Maybe their husband's going to jump in, even if they don't work for that particular company. It has a trickle-down effect. Where it's even more successful is when they continue to engage that company on a year-round basis, not just on race weekend, but going to those companies and leading training runs after work or lunch and learns about nutrition and injury prevention. Those are all extensions of an incredible partnership that we're seeing a lot of our events really sort of dabble in and be very, very successful at.
Sam, do you want to come in?
I think the corporate wellness market is one of the most untapped areas of potential for us, all of us in this room, whether you're an organizer, a rights holder, a brand, but it's going to take a shift in how most of us do that. So Tough Mudder and Spartan are two good examples of firms who I think have done very well embracing what's essentially a B2B2C model, right? So you're no longer reaching out to consumers, you're reaching out to companies and engaging them to bring in the consumers. Speaking personally, we're not doing it well. We've just started, but it's going to be a really big area of focus for us because you can just reach so many more people. I don't want to talk too much about TCS other than the fact I'd love them to sponsor some of our events, but it's one of the best examples, one of the best examples I've seen certainly of an entire organization engaging around running. And that doesn't have to be a sponsorship play, it can be a corporate wellness play. It's fantastic to see.
And from your side, Marko?
Absolutely essential for European workforce. European Commission as executive body of the European Union very often emphasizes the role of sports, not only organized but sports in general, and all the key stakeholders should think about getting the European population active. That means the workforce is more healthy, productive, etc. I think that a lot of companies that were essentially having the backbone, the event management and around the endurance business are getting into that niche. The niche is quite big, so maybe it's not niche. It's a whole industry to be explored, and it's great to see our industry leaders, the companies across Europe and the globe, taking that approach actively. Whether that's through the corporate relays, where they actually start engaging with a bigger number of companies and then penetrating that market through those events, or through their platforms for training, for preparations for the events, or with the specific programs that they promote to the cities, to the companies. So it's really great to see that we are there in that market, because the endurance market or the mass participation market is really has the knowledge to back up this work that can be provided to the companies.
Great, thank you. Penultimate question, we're on 7 minutes, so I think we'll be all right. So we heard from Paul Sinton-Hewitt, founder of Parkrun yesterday. The story never gets old, boring, it's just fascinating. We're seeing a huge growth of participation initiatives that are free. Parkrun recently announced its 5 millionth runner. And we've also seen at the other end of the spectrum the continued success of the most long-standing events. London Marathon had 451,000 applications for its ballot in 2019. So, are you observing those successes in each of your territories? And also, what is the future for what is starting to be known as the squeezed middle?
I can take it first. This is probably the one negative sort of part of the conversation, I guess, because I don't think there's an obvious answer for the squeezed middle. The market is moving in a way that's going to be challenging for the mid-tier of the market. You have, as you've just eloquently said, explained the bottom end of the market, which I think is, by the way, I say bottom, obviously, I mean the bottom of the pyramid. That's a fantastic trend for the industry overall. It's bringing more and more people in. I think Parkrun is one of the best things that can happen to the market. Certainly, our 5K registrations might drop off where there is a Parkrun, but I don't think that's a problem either, because it's bringing more and more runners in. The challenge is that if you think about most, and I'm going to speak to the US just for a second, the middle of the market, costs are going up. It's more expensive to put these races on, whether that's from interacting with a city or just the basic costs, and it's harder to bring in customers every day. And so unless you've got something really unique and different, it's going to be hard to survive. And I don't think there's necessarily an answer for that other than Motiv. So we're consolidating the industry, and so if you're a small organizer and you'd like to join a bigger group, please come and see me afterwards. No, I'm only joking, but it plays into the consolidation fact. I think that's probably the only answer, at least for me.
And we see that, you know, in our, we host a very large annual conference in the U.S., and every year I go back and I look at the list of who was there last year and who's coming this next year, and there's definitely been a shift in that. To Sam's point, the cost of putting on an event in the U.S. are astronomical, and folks just don't need to pay, you know, $85 for a 10K. That's just, it's too much for the regular consumer to do that on a weekly basis.
I was very impressed with the Paul's presentation, and it's great to see the movement from the 60s, with the running movement having the grassroots in the liberate movement and the real grassroots across the globe, first in US, then Europe and Asia and the other continents. I think that movement, the running movement, brought values into the society. They took the values that are important for them and built to the society. I think that we moved from non-event-based running to a lot of event-based running, and it's good that the park run is bridging that gap and bringing the people together and the similar initiatives to the park run as well, that are bringing these people that are not enthusiastic into participating into the events, but bringing them into the social circles and eventually to type of events that the Saturday and Sundays run become. I think that there is a great future for non-event related running activities, and if they are values based, and that these values correspond to the society, eventually the big corporate sponsorships will be there to support. So I think we are going to see as I really think what Sam just mentioned is really a reality, where the lower tier and the second tier races even are struggling, so that these events and these concepts that are events-based are going to suffer. They're going to need to find either partners to consolidate and cut down the costs, find ways to engage new audiences in order to retain first and then to increase the participation, probably in non-traditional distances and events. But then these alternative solutions that are there from the very beginning in terms of the values and people getting together with a certain social values are gonna complement greatly the movement to make a next progress.
Great, thank you. We've got 2 minutes left. We haven't prepped for this one, so sorry for putting you on the spot. Sport England released a report the other day which was pretty depressing about childhood activity levels were at a pretty much all-time low. I'm going to ask you, each of you, if there's one thing you could do today to change that, what would it be? Christine.
Be an example. And so I know for me, I've always been very active in the community with the local runs at the schools and things of that nature. So I think being that continuing to be an example and going out and how you support your local schools, YMCAs, things like that, I think could be a huge benefit and a driver for events to, you know, keep those kids, get them started. There's some great programs out there that can facilitate that.
What would you see as best in class at the moment in that?
Gosh, right now for me, I just because it's a friend of mine, Cowtown Marathon in Texas does a phenomenal job where they go out and they purchase a pair of shoes for every single child that wants to run as part of their program. And then they train them throughout the season to then continue to run with them on their race weekend. But there's no barrier to entry. They get socks and they get shoes and they get the training, they get nutrition evaluations, everything across the board. So, you know, hats off to them for that.
And Sam, what's your one magic wand?
I mean, it's not really a magic wand. I would just agree with what Christine said. I mean, I think that whether it's brands, whether it's events, we should be embracing school activity, not the opposite. And so we're actually working on an initiative ourselves where we can bring our events, which many children that might live in a regional area can't come to Sydney to do the marathon, but we can take the marathon to them. And I think organizers and brands need to think that way, because if we don't, again, might be negative in the last like 15 seconds, this industry will age out because the average age of runners is going up. And so unless we embrace and find a way to bring in, whether it's through parkrun or schools initiatives, the running industry won't be around anymore. So I think it's very important.
And Marko, to finish us off.
Yeah, European Commission has one great initiative that European Athletics is a partner of since the beginning 4 years ago. It's called European Week of Sport, and the hashtag #BeActive is the brand. I think that since the education system is the biggest social channel that all of us go through, or the majority of the world population go through, it's the most important channel to make a social change. For example, chairless schools would be a starting point, or chairless days, or chairless weeks in schools, so people can move. I think that there is a essential need, and many European countries are doing that. They are changing the education model, but still, even the physical obstacle, being the chair and being there, that you need to sit. First, what you do when the teacher comes, you sit. You stand to honor the teacher, and then you sit probably for 4 to 6 hours a day. It's terrible. So probably some initiatives like excluding those obstacles would be a good proposition to start with. Yeah.
Great. Well, we're out of time. When we were preparing for the panel, I think we identified probably about 20 trends that we could have talked about this afternoon. So we may have just scratched the surface, but I think we've covered some interesting topics that can be continued in discussions across the afternoon. So just like to say a big thank you to the panel, and thank you for your time.